More is better than less. Quantity is the most important thing. The biggest is best. The fastest is best. I wonder how many examples similar to that you could think of. Well, our parable that we have today from Jesus, the parable of the mustard seed, and for that matter, the parable of the yeast, kind of turn that on their head. They actually say that it's the small things that are really important. In the parable of the mustard seed, we're told that the mustard seed, which I'm led to believe is about the size of a pinhead, can actually grow into the greatest of shrubs. Likewise, with the parable of the yeast, a small amount of yeast affects all the dough and causes it all to rise. Something very small has a huge effect. I think society, to a large degree, has become very hung up on quantity, volume and size. And as I've spoken about over the past few weeks, I think the pandemic that we are currently still going through, but particularly during lockdown, has actually caused us to reframe how we think about things in terms of importance and their value to us. We have, I would like to suggest, become wiser people. We've certainly become more discerning. Like Solomon a little bit in our first reading that Frank read to us from Kings. Solomon was renowned for his wisdom and his discernment. He was a thinker. He thought things through. He didn't just take things at face value. That's what he was so well known for. That's why we have the term, the wisdom of Solomon. Well, next week we return to the church building for our Eucharist for the first time since the lockdown. But services are going to be very different. They're going to be much shorter. There's going to be less in them. There will be no hymns. There will be fewer prayers. We will only have one reading, not two readings. But that doesn't in any way mean that they will be less important, less effective, or hopefully any less enjoyable. They will be very different though. In fact, many may think the fact that the sermons will also be considerably shorter actually will be a great blessing. In our second reading from Paul's book to the Romans that Nicholas read to us, we hear, "For we do not know how to pray as we ought, but the very Spirit intercedes." This tells me once again that actually our knowledge as human beings, our understanding is certainly lacking, that we actually have to rely on God's Holy Spirit to guide us and to make things known to us that perhaps are hidden. In other words, the Holy Spirit gives us a way of reframing what is important and the world around us. Well, the smallest of acts, or words actually, can have the greatest effect or impact on people's lives. The last part of that reading from Romans, where it says, "I'm convinced that neither life nor death," and then we have a long list of things that cannot separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ, is a passage that I often use at funerals. When somebody loses a loved one, it's often the smallest things, the smallest words, the smallest acts of kindness that can have the greatest effect. During the pandemic, there have been a great many deaths, both due to coronavirus and through other causes. And post-lockdown, those who lose and have lost loved ones will still find that the funeral services and other services very much restricted. These new restrictions, although the lockdown's been lifted, we still are working under restrictions, will affect all of our church services, our weddings, our baptisms, our funerals, our Eucharists, and of course they will also affect many other areas of our lives. But less people and simpler services have the potential to have an even deeper, more profound and greater impact on people's lives, their faith, their celebrations or their mourning and their healing. And so as we move into this next stage of our journey in the coronavirus story and the next stage in our journey with God, my prayer is that we can realise and embrace the fact that when we trust in God, so much can come from something that we perceive to be very small, very little, or very insignificant, if we trust in God and we trust in God's Holy Spirit. Amen.